Welcome to Parenting Adventures. We help parents empower their kids to build a growth mindset so they can tackle any size challenge that school and life can throw at them. From grades to bullying and struggles at home and school, and everything in between. Whether you're in the elementary alphabet stage or navigating high school credits, we're diving into how you can relate and influence positive action. Stick around for real solutions, expert tips, and stories that resonate and inspire. Ready for personalized mindful tutoring? Head to tutorteach.ca/tutoring to see how our 9 cornerstones to success have helped over 3,000 students achieve their goals. Now, let's dig into the episode.
Have you ever noticed your child struggles with tasks that seem simple to other kids, or wondered why your child reacts so strongly to certain sounds or textures? Today, we're diving into sensory development to help you understand and support your child's unique needs. I'm your host, Lara, and today we're thrilled to have Jessica Edwards, an experienced occupational therapist, join us. Jessica completed her Bachelor of Kinesiology at the University of British Columbia and moved to Edmonton for her Master of Science in Occupational Therapy from the University of Alberta. Jessica's extensive career includes work in nonprofit organizations, public health, private practice, and school board. She specializes in sensory and motor development, feeding and swallowing, visual motor development, and addressing challenging behaviors. She's passionate about creating individualized, play-based, and fun interventions that help children thrive. In today's episode, we talk about the different types of sensory processing, key sensory milestones, and signs to look out for that might indicate sensory issues with your child. Stay tuned as we explore these important topics and give you insights to support your child's development. Keep listening. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jessica. To start, could you give us a quick rundown of what you do as an occupational therapist and kind of your journey getting there?
Sure. So OTs, it's a super broad profession. And so kind of within pediatrics is where I focused my career. I break it down into we help kids do the things that they need to do and want to do in their day. And that can look like so many different things. It could be using the washroom. It could be being able to complete their homework by writing. It could be figuring out some different executive functioning strategies to support participation in different routines. So we really always want to tie it back to function, and we have a unique lens as OTs to be able to offer feedback when it comes to sensory regulation and motor skills, executive functioning, a whole bunch of different lenses that kind of support and break down what could potentially be a barrier to participation. And so it really makes for a unique intervention for whatever the child's coming in for.
So it's safe to say that no 2 days look alike.
Very safe to say that, yes. And a little bit about my journey to OT. I did an undergrad degree in kinesiology, and I was really drawn to science and movement and all of that. Wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with that. And then once I heard about OT, I was like, man, this is just an amazing job that no one seems to know exists. And I think what drew me to it is I love to make connections with other people. And I don't feel like you can really be doing due diligence as an OT without that connection piece and without really trying to figure out what are the family's values, really asking the hard questions and trying to figure out what makes this child tick and giving them tools to also kind of self advocate for what they need. And I just felt like it was a perfect fit for me. So I did my master's degree at the University of Alberta and have been working in pediatrics ever since.
That's great. I do think that occupational therapy is starting to fall in people's dictionaries a little bit more now. I hear the word going around, but I still think that a lot of people don't know what it means, or because it doesn't mean just one thing. It's got so many different definitions and so many different meanings. And so, how did you decide to go in the exact practice that you've chosen?
When I was doing my master's degree, I had a few different placements, one of which was in pediatrics, but the rest of mine were all in adults. I really enjoyed my mental health placements as well. And I think that within coursework and also just kind of some of those practicum experiences, I felt a really strong draw to pediatrics, and I liked that I was able to integrate working with adults as the parents, also with the kids, and really kind of getting the best of both worlds. And I think I really crave a lot of variety in my day, and so not to say that that can't happen with adult occupational therapy as well, but it's what I fell into, and I felt like, you know what, this is a good fit once I started to get going with it. And I really haven't looked back since.
So, before we get too deep into our topic today, would you mind just touching on what sensory development is all about? Why is it such a big deal for our children?
Yeah, I think that sensory development, I mean, it's a natural part of the human experience. And I think a lot of toys, you'll see kind of those buzzwords printed on there for marketing a lot of the time, like great for sensory development, or a whole bunch of blogs out there and things like that. And so I think people are coming across it more, I think, just because knowledge is increasing and the access to knowledge is increasing every day. But yeah, I think that yeah, sensory development itself is a natural part of the human experience, right? We're all born typically with the ability to smell and hear and see and experience the world in a multidimensional fashion. And yeah, and so I think then people sometimes get worried when, are we doing enough to prepare our little ones' bodies? Are we giving them the right inputs at the right time? And what about when it doesn't feel like it's working, right? Within those typical ranges, or you're experiencing challenges in certain environments. And that's typically when people tend to come through my door, and we have kind of more in depth chats about that to kind of see what's going on. But yeah.
I think that social media, and I don't know if you agree with this, but social media has made us as parents compare our children possibly in skill and whatnot to other children. And so that must put a little bit of worry in a parent's mind if they deem that their child has a sensory delay versus their friend's child or something that they saw online.
Well, for sure. And I think I like to always reassure parents too that, like, this is, it's only a concern if there's something that's impacting function. And so if you can't participate in something, it's impeding your independence, or it's impeding or impacting your regulation, then those are reasons to look into it. But no one needs to fit one size fits all kind of thing when it comes to sensory development. And I think as adults, we all kind of are a little bit in tune to sometimes of what our own sensory preferences are, what our own sensory sensitivities might be. We automatically make adaptations and accommodations and modifications for ourselves, right? And so when I was studying in my master's, I would not be somebody who went into Starbucks to study. That it was my worst nightmare. I would want to go to the silent level on the library, and I'm quite sensitive to sound. And so if I knew that about myself, I'm already making the right moves to kind of accommodate for that. Um, and I think sometimes when I have those discussions with parents, they're like, "Oh, you're right. I do that too. And I already do that." And sometimes we just need to help our kids along and figure out how can we problem solve with them to make them as comfortable as possible and give them the tools that they need to be able to self advocate for what they need when they potentially, maybe it's a mishmash between the environment and their needs.
That is so important and makes me think about myself along with my children. They love the stimulation of music while they're eating breakfast or when they're, putting their laundry away, things like that. Whereas I focus better with absolute silence. I like nothing to be interrupting my flow of thought. I don't like being stimulated at all while I'm doing a task. And so, that's interesting. Just like we're all different learners, we all have different sensory needs. And that's, as an adult, we take it for granted that we're adapting for ourselves. And so it's important to be adaptive to our children as well.
Oh, absolutely. And there's not, you can fall outside of typical ranges on sensory questionnaires and things like that. But again, it always ties back to function, right? If you already have accommodations and modifications to different activities to allow you to participate fully, there's no need to try and switch your pattern so that you are falling within that typical range, right? We want adults and kids to be living their authentic lives. And we don't want to desensitize anyone to certain stimuli. And sure, that can be successful if done in certain environments, but at what cost is usually what I ask. And so if I was super sensitive to sound, simply just sitting in day after day really loud environments, sure, my body may habituate to that and get used to it, but at what cost, right? I'm probably going to be incredibly dysregulated. And to me, that's not worth it. And so if we don't have to do it that way, let's not for everyone's sake. And so, yeah, that's just kind of my perspective when it comes to sensory regulation.
It's a good perspective. So I know there are different types of sensory processing like touch, sound, and sight. Can you walk us through these and how they impact our little ones?
Yeah, so there's lots of different senses, right? So we have vision and hearing and touch and taste and smell. We have body awareness, which is kind of that proprioception sense. It's the impact, it's the input that we get from our muscles and our joints when we're engaging in movement. Tells our brain where our body is and what it's doing. We also have the vestibular sense. And so we have these really cool little semicircle canals within our ears filled with some fluid, and it senses when we change direction, right? Or so if I hang my head upside down with my eyes closed, I know my head's hanging upside down, right? And if I am jumping up, or if I'm doing a somersault with my eyes closed, I know where my body is in space. If I'm spinning on a swing, that's activating that vestibular system. Um, we also have our kind of lesser known system of interoception. So, those senses of all these internal sensations. So, hunger, thirst, pain, temperature, and it goes on, right? And those are even tied to emotions and all those interoception senses. And so when we're angry, our heart might beat fast. We might be breathing really quickly. Our skin might be getting hot and sweaty, and kind of being able to cue into all of those sensory cues of what is my body telling me actually ties so much to our emotions and how we make sense of emotions, because what my body does when I'm angry might be different than what somebody else's body does. And so the senses that our body experiences, we just have so many, and it's such a robust system. When things either aren't working in a typical fashion, it doesn't always mean that that is bad, wrong, or broken, of course. And but that we might need to look into accommodations or modifications to tasks or environments. There can be certain processing patterns that come up either through observation from an occupational therapist or through questionnaires that parents also complete, or children as well. And so I kind of like to describe it as cups and in a line. And on one side, you have a tiny cup. And so think about a teacup or a thimble or something super tiny. And that's your over responders. And then in the middle, you're going to have your typical size cup. And so a regular size drinking glass. And then you're also going to have on the other side a great big cup. And those are your under responders. So if you think about a kitchen faucet being turned on, and that's some sensory stimuli, so maybe it's auditory input. Well, they're all going to get filled up at the same time, but that over responsive cup is going to overfill much quicker. Right. So that might have lots of different effects for children or adults when they're feeling dysregulated or just not right. Um, it's not to say that your regular size typical glass can't overfill. Of course it can, but it's going to require more input. And keeping in mind that everyone wants their cups full, but not overflowing. And then, of course, we have our seekers. And lots of people hear about, oh, my kid's a sensory seeker, and that's a big buzzword. And I kind of view that as we might have holes on the bottom of that really big cup. So as you're filling it up with stimuli that's preferred, it's also actively draining on you. And so you're kind of fighting this uphill battle of also trying to get proactively a lot of that input that those kids are seeking. And so, yeah, then that's kind of gives me a little bit of a visual in my head. And it could be each sense could be in a different kind of cup and a different pattern, right? And so your sensory system, just because you're sensitive to one thing, doesn't mean that you don't seek out something else. And it can be really kind of unique to an individual.
Can those cups change from day to day where maybe that teacup on a Monday might look different on a Wednesday, or do they typically kind of stay in the same place through the weeks?
Yeah, they're like fairly consistent, but at the same time, of course, there's going to be things that amplify kind of the size of that too. So if I'm already sensitive to sound and I have a smaller teacup for that stimuli or a smaller cup in general and I'm over responsive, well, if I didn't sleep that night, I haven't had a snack, I skipped my morning coffee. Well, now I am just like my teacup is a thimble now, and I am just trying to make it through the day, because our bodies are just kind of not in their optimal states. Right. And it's not to say that we ever want to transition everyone to having that regular size drinking glass, because there's ways to turn down the flow of the faucet. There's ways to stop it, right? We can leave environments. We can wear noise canceling headphones. We can dim that flow so that it's not um, as quick as filling our cup and leading to quick dysregulation as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would imagine certain events, certain scenarios can shift those cups a little bit too. Like you said, if you had a bad sleep, or if you have a for older kids, if they have a test coming up, maybe they have lower tolerances in some areas when they're anticipating something, they feel anxious, things like that.
For sure. And I find that sometimes it's almost like the flow gets turned on even quicker and when things are unpredictable too, right? So if I am not anticipating and I'm walking down, I'm having like a great walk on the street and I'm just enjoying the sunshine and it's quiet outside and I'm just kind of relaxing um and then suddenly a fire truck zooms by that I wasn't expecting and then like 3 and 4 other fire trucks zoom on by. That is going to probably fill my cup in a much faster speed because it's unpredictable. My body couldn't prepare for that input. As opposed to if you were told a fire drill is going to be happening at 11 a.m. today, sure. Is it going to be enjoyable? Probably not. But will you be far more prepared for that stimuli as opposed to if it was just a shock at 11 a.m.? 100%. So, predictability and unpredictability play a big piece too when it comes to sensory input.
Yeah, I have yet to meet someone who says, I like things to be unpredictable.
Yeah.
We like to anticipate somewhat of what things are going to be like in our day, for sure. So, are there any key sensory milestones that we should be aware of as our children grow?
Well, I think it's important to know that, some things come out kind of fully developed as a child's born. And so, things like sight is going to change over time, right? We know that kids' vision, it changes, especially within those first 12 months. Right? You're going to have more limited color when you're born. And over time, within the first 3 to 6 months, you're going to kind of develop more of that robust visual experience. Whereas at other times, right, like smell, hearing, and touch, those are typically when you're born fully intact, right? And taste initially as an infant is born, they tend to have more of a preference for sweeter flavors. Again, that's going to kind of modify and change in terms of the palate within the first 12 months. But yeah, I think that the important thing to really know about as a parent when it comes to sensory regulation is that we want to give our kids really varied and rich and robust sensory experiences so that they can begin to explore their world in various different ways, right? So, touching different textures, hearing different tones of sounds, right? And I think it's way more important just to get the exposure to different situations and stimuli as opposed to um, really focusing on just one particular sense at a time.
It does start really early, doesn't it? And as parents, we want to give our children what they want, of course. And so I remember, with my kids, we give them strawberry purees when they're babies, or banana purees, all those sweet ones. Does that impact then the trajectory of what they like in the future? Because I've noticed that it's harder to filter in those other foods after I've given them kind of what they really like when they're so little.
Yeah, and taste is so individual, right? And we know that taste buds continue to change over time. And I always use the example too of like, as I was growing up, my parents would drink coffee and I would smell it and I enjoyed the smell. But when I tried it, I was like, oh, this is the worst thing in the world. But now, many years later, I don't think I could get by without a cup of morning coffee or a middle of the day coffee or a 5 p.m. coffee. But, and again, like, and it's a flavor that now I really enjoy. And so, yeah, I think that keeping in mind that kids are allowed to have preferences and that's okay. They're individuals. We all have preferences as well. And that's nothing to necessarily be actively trying to avoid them developing. But if it's starting to cause a functional concern where, you know what, my kid will only eat strawberries and no other fruit. And they say it's due to the flavor, like they just hate every other flavor. Or they're so sensitive to every single smell that I can't eat, they can't even be in the same room or the same floor when I'm cooking. Well, then those are posing functional concerns that then we need to kind of figure out what are some strategies that we could do in those situations to enable a child to be able to participate fully in their daily life.
So, what are some of the signs that might hint that your child is having a tough time with sensory processing, and anything we as parents should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to trust your gut, right? Like I have a lot of parents that I do free consultations with, and they're like, you know what, Jessica, I just don't know if it's sensory. And I tell them, well, like, that's okay. It's not your job to have to figure that out, too, right? Like if you have a gut feeling, usually more often than not, that's fairly accurate and at least worth exploring. And so we want to typically what I'm looking for is it causing a functional impact, right? And so is it causing the child to be distressed in certain environments? Is it causing them to not want to participate or stay home? And we're thinking consistently, it always seems to be tied to a certain environment. Are they avoiding or seeking out certain inputs far more than others? And you're just not sure if that's typical or if you need to be kind of embedding more opportunities proactively for those inputs throughout the day. So there's no one kind of telltale sign when it comes to are there sensory concerns or where does my child's sensory patterns lie? It's kind of totally individual. And we never, at least from my perspective, really want to change those patterns either. That's what makes a child themselves and unique. But we want to make sure too that there aren't any barriers for them to participate in daily life.
It's true. Trusting your gut as a parent is the number one best piece of advice, and advocating for them. And just like we tell our kids there's no stupid questions, it's the same for adults. Go and ask, go and find out, get some support and see if your gut's serving you in this situation, because if you don't ask, you don't know.
Yeah, 100%. And I have no problem telling people too, you know what, it doesn't sound like something sensory. And that's okay too, because then maybe we can kind of problem solve together about what it could be, right? And where would be the best kind of place to direct those questions to. Lots of other professionals tend to also do referrals. So maybe sometimes children are working with psychologists and working on emotional regulation. And then they get kind of to know the child and the family. And then they're kind of wondering, hey, maybe there's a sensory component here too. So, getting some referrals from other disciplines and other professionals as well to just kind of further collaborate and get a full picture of the child is sometimes how things get identified as well.
It takes a village.
Yes.
That's for sure. So, at what point should parents seek help for these kinds of signs or issues? And are these delays always something that warrant therapy, or do some delays resolve on their own?
Yeah. And so I think kind of going back to my main theme is that if it's not causing a functional impact and you have some strategies already in place to modify tasks or environments, then you're good to go. As long as you're feeling like you're not dysregulated by certain inputs and you're able to do all the things that you want to do in your day and you aren't limited by any sensory sensitivities or seeking out of certain stimuli, then there doesn't necessarily need to be therapy, right? It doesn't mean that, um, in the future, that as circumstances change or kids become older and new task expectations increase or change for their lives, that we might not need to do some more, we might need to do more brainstorming too about kind of what um, might need to work in a different environment. But yeah, I'm kind of probably the worst OT salesperson out there in terms of I don't think everyone needs OT. My goal is always to empower people to figure out tools that work for them and then let them fly with those. Because really the magic is what happens out in the real world, not what happens in a 1 hour session in a sterile clinic.
100%. When you talk about it's impacting them, can you give an example of what that might look like? When do we know that the sensory processing is starting to create that impact?
Sure. So, one of the common examples I get is maybe there are certain textures that a child is very sensitive to, and that's limiting them where they only have one shirt that they can tolerate wearing comfortably. And that shirt they are outgrowing and it has holes in it, and parents are feeling stressed because, hey, what else are they going to wear soon? And we haven't been able to problem solve this. Um, or same thing when it comes to foods, right? If smells are too big for certain kids, and that's limiting their ability to participate in meal times, go to restaurants with their family, be able to sit at school at a group table and have snack because they're just so averse or sensitive to certain smells, then that's a huge functional impact for that child. Other things would be, my kid loves going to that indoor play place, but it is so loud that as soon as we get there, they're screaming, they're crying, they're covering their ears. They're telling me it's too loud and they want to go home, but I don't understand it. They love it. And so, kind of, as soon as we're starting to notice it impede participation or independence with something, is usually a cue of, hey, we might need to do some brainstorming to find some tools that work.
What about in the classroom? How can the teachers get involved in that? What should they be looking out for? Because this our kids go to school for 10 months out of the year, and so the main um mentor in their lives during, between 8 and 4 is their teacher. So in a classroom they can get lost pretty easily. So how do we support the teachers in looking for sensory processing challenges?
Yeah, I think that teachers are such an important piece to this puzzle too, because, like you said, they are with your kids for many, many hours a week and get to see them in a group environment, which all parents don't always get to frequently observe their child in. And so again, things that commonly come up at school are when a teacher might say, hey, this kid really needs to move their body and they cannot sit in a desk, or they really, whenever I turn around, they're flipped upside down, hanging off their desks, trying to spin around, or, they are constantly covering their eyes and they're sitting by the window and kind of shielding them. So they have the opportunity absolutely to be kind of sensory detectives and pick up some of that, the functional implications of that. And I always really firmly believe too, right? Like there's no bad kids. And so there's no kids that are standing up just for fun, or, that they're just moving their bodies to always get a rise, right? Typically, if we are needing to leave activities to get certain inputs, then that's telling us pretty strongly that our body might need more of that. And so, why don't we infuse it into the activity instead so that they can kind of fill up those cups while they get other tasks completed? So, that might look like in a classroom, right? It might look like alternative seating that allows for more movement. It might involve kind of figuring out the exact environmental sensitivities that this child has. And if it's to vision, for example, maybe not having them close to the window where they're getting kind of that direct sun just coming right into their eyes, or hey, are they right underneath a fluorescent light bulb that's probably just driving them over the edge sometimes, and or they really next to like a very cluttered bulletin board, and that's leading to just kind of overwhelm by all of this visual input that they have. And so there's so many different environmental modifications that can be done in classrooms, and not all of them have to be pricey and expensive and things like that, but I think oftentimes it starts with the teacher kind of identifying a lot of those functional implications that are impacting participation.
We have to be detectives.
Hmm.
With my son, we asked the school permission that he chews gum in class, because it helps him focus. And they had absolutely no qualms about it. They were completely supportive of it. We talked about a plan of when he was done with his gum, what does he do with it? So he's not sticking it on the bottom of his desk. But it was a big, I thought that they would say no because, it's no chewing gum in class, but because of his age. And they were really supportive of it. So until you raise your concerns with the school, you never know how accommodating they'll be, and they should be fairly accommodating.
Absolutely. And if you're coming with to them with a strategy that potentially you already know really works well for your child, then I think oftentimes too, when you're starting a new school or transitioning into a new grade, and if you have tools like chewing gum that works really well for your kid, or hey, my kid really needs a wobble stool in the classroom, or a wiggle cushion, or a rocking chair, or something to meet their needs, then kind of being feeling comfortable too that like advocate for that whenever possible, right? The worst thing that can happen is you get a no, but you may also be able to kind of have your child's needs identified really early too. Advocating for our children is so important, right? And even better if they're able to self advocate for their own needs as they become older. But until then, and some of our little ones as well. So if we're thinking preschooler age and kindergarten age, they may need you to really step up as the parent and advocate for what they need, and express that to educators or the swimming instructor or others that are involved in their life, so that they can fully participate, especially if you know that there are tools that work well for your child already. Because it's really just giving everyone more information so that everyone can do well.
And especially as we try to raise our children to be aware that everyone's different, has different needs, and we need to be accepting of everyone's different modalities and whatnot, then this is a good example where maybe this child has a wobbly stool and this one's chewing gum and that one wants a dim seating arrangement in the classroom. And this one might need to put on earmuffs to block out sound. And, we're all different and that's okay. That's what makes us special, right? So the acceptability amongst our peers grows when we see everyone doing things a little bit differently and it makes them happier and more capable.
Absolutely. And I think it just kind of shows them the difference too between equity and equality, right? That everyone else might need different things in order to achieve the same results. And that's not bad, and it's not less than, but they still should be afforded those opportunities. And I think, yeah, I totally agree, right? Like, it means so much. To see other kids also just observing that within the classroom, right? I think it really destigmatizes using a lot of different tools and things like that, and makes them. I know so many tools are more mainstream these days, right? I think one that I love to bring up is kind of those loop headphones that sometimes you might see ads for that I know a lot of adults and parents might use that are kind of noise canceling headphones within the ear. And so things have also grown tool wise over the years, and there's many different options that aren't also going to necessarily stand out if that is something that a child is concerned about, or uncomfortable with. Some children may not mind, but other kids might, right? So I think that it's amazing that there's so many different options for sensory tools these days, because it really gives people just so many more options to meet their needs.
And just working with tutor teach and talking with parents, they'll often say that the schools are making accommodations so their kids have an extra half hour to take a test due to test anxiety, or they get to take their test in a room separately because of the distraction. So it's really good to see these schools on the kids' side and on their students' side making sure that they're able to thrive, just with little tweaks to their learning plans.
Oh, absolutely. I love whenever accommodations are able to be offered and followed through on for children, and it results in success. Because I think it just goes to build a positive experience with school too for kids, right? If they feel like they're successful, and are getting what they need, then that's awesome. They're going to want to go back every day and really enjoy learning. And I think that that's such an important piece.
So, how can sensory processing challenges affect how a child plays or learns or how they interact with their peers?
Sure. And so I think we can all kind of put ourselves in a child's shoes here too, right? If you are sensitive to sound and maybe don't love busy environments that are really visually stimulating, you're probably not going to love going to this super loud party every single weekend. You might be somebody who wants more downtime, or would enjoy kind of a more kind of low key, visually stimulating environment when it comes to something you're going to do on your own time. Same thing with kids, right? We might see challenges during birthday parties, right? If our sensory systems are feeling overwhelmed in certain areas, depending on our particular processing patterns, then we may um, have challenges with executive functioning skills. Our attention and focus may become more limited. Our ability to regulate our emotions may become impacted. And we may kind of start to engage in certain behaviors that we wouldn't typically engage in because they're often communicative in function, right? All behaviors are communicating something. And lots of the time, it may be communicating overwhelm or, hey, I'm stressed out and my body is experiencing a stress response right now. And that's really the result of kind of the environment around them. So yeah, there could be lots of different impacts when it comes to kids in different environments and how it impacts play and things like that. Because if we're not feeling our best based off of other stimuli around us, then absolutely it's going to impact how we interact with others, our frustration tolerance, our attention and focus, all of those things.
So, how can an occupational therapist help kids who struggle with sensory processing? What kind of activities and techniques do you use in your work? And what can parents expect from their first visit?
Yeah, so typically when somebody is coming to me, when they are questioning if there's sensory processing patterns or want to identify some different sensory strategies to support their child in different environments, I first start by gathering information. And oftentimes I like to use a tool called the sensory processing measure and to also gain some insight on behaviors and situations that would occur outside of the clinic setting. And so, for example, I'm not going to be able to reflect on how a child, participates in meal times or responds to a particular sound that a fire truck might make, right? And so those questionnaires kind of help aid my clinical observations by providing me a bit of a picture of things I can't see always within a clinic environment. And sometimes, too, I want to make sure what I'm seeing in the clinic isn't just a one off, right? And that it's in line with what parents are seeing consistently. And then oftentimes I combine that with an observational kind of play based observation of a child. We have a great movement and sensory space here that has some abilities to, dim lights and add different light features and lots of different swings for different inputs. And I often will just kind of follow the child's lead. See what they're drawn to, what they're not drawn to, and what their responses are, right? Is something really kind of tending to dysregulate them when they engage in it, or is it more calming to their system when they engage in certain behaviors? And so, oftentimes kids just think it's fun and it's play, but I have my detective hat on the whole time. And so, yeah, and then following that, I usually debrief with parents about, hey, these were kind of the patterns that I saw based off of what you shared with me, based off of what I saw. And here's how we can kind of help support some of those functional concerns that you brought forward, right? And oftentimes it is specific to something, right? There was a clinical question that they brought forward. Maybe it is, my kid can't participate in swimming lessons, but they love the pool. But yet we found out that they're really sensitive to sound, and and pools have horrible acoustics. And so then we kind of figure out and brainstorm together some different strategies to try that are going to work well for that family. It doesn't mean purchasing super expensive equipment. It doesn't mean that you have to be doing these things every single day and changing a child's sensory patterns. It's just giving you tools and ideas on how can we modify certain environments or tasks to accommodate for someone's unique needs. And so, yeah, I usually kind of send them on their way after that to try that out. And if they need any future support, then, come back, let's brainstorm together, knowing what we know about your child, and figure out perhaps something else creative to meet a need if something new has arisen.
And that kind of leads me into my next question. So, what can parents do to make their homes more sensory friendly? Are there specific toys, activities, lifestyle changes that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I think it's so individual to the kid, right? And so for some kids, unlimited access to gross motor movement may in and of itself be dysregulating, right? So it may be figuring out how could we do gross motor and proprioception input in a structured way. And so we're not kind of amping ourselves up so much with the gross motor, or um, some kids may need more visual input, right? Whereas other kids need that limited. So it's really dependent on the child, their unique needs, and the needs of the family. Because sometimes you can also have conflicting needs within the family, right? Um, you might have a child who craves sound and seeks it out, and a parent who's sensitive to it. And so they both have to share the same house often. And so we kind of have to figure out a way too to balance everyone's needs. So, no one size fits all approach or kind of tools or toys or activities, because it really is so specific to the child.
Yeah, and that goes back to even just my household where I like it quiet, my kids like it loud. So some of the, changes we've made is that they each have a little music player in their rooms and they've got wireless headphones that they can throw on if they want to listen to their music or the radio so that it doesn't affect everybody in the household. Not everyone has to listen to the same thing at the same time at the same volume.
Absolutely, right? And everyone's still getting what they need. And oftentimes sometimes it's usually you're usually able to find a solution that works for everyone, right? Sometimes it requires more creative brainstorming, but I like those situations as well, right? Where you kind of challenge your brain to think of an out of the box solution to something that is causing a family concern or impacting their daily life.
So if anyone listening wants to reach out to you or Alberta Therapy Co, how can they do that?
Yeah, so they can call our clinic at 780-441-1220. And they can always ask to book a consultation with one of our occupational therapists. And those are free consultations that can answer any questions, kind of decide what would be the best next step. It doesn't always result in services too, right? Especially if there's potentially a different, more pressing need that comes up that we can't support, then we want to be able to redirect you to the right place. But it's a place to kind of ask and kind of start at least. That's very low committal, and it's free and accessible to families. So I usually recommend that as a first step.
I think that's a comfortable first step, a safe first step, and something that a parent who's a little bit on the fence might be excited about because we want to find the help for our children, but it has to make sense for us as their parents to be able to get it for them. So, well, thank you so much, Jessica, for your time with us. I think it's been really, really informative. So, thank you so much for sharing with our community what sensory processing is and how to handle it.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks so much for joining us on Parenting Adventures. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and we're always here to help. Parenting is like trying to fold a fitted sheet. It seems impossible at first, but with enough determination, you can make it work. Kind of. If you're ready for the next step, visit tutorteach.ca/tutoring for personalized mindful tutoring and discover how we've helped over 3,000 students reach their goals. Until next time, keep calm and fold on.